It's funny, isn't it? This whole myth of the overnight startup success,
Mhm.
the idea that it all just boils down to some magic mix of talent and, perfect timing.
Right, being in the right place at the right time.
Exactly. But the author of the book we're diving into today, Eric Ries, he saw something really different after years in the trenches, building and watching startups.
Yeah, he realized that building something successful, something innovative, it isn't really about waiting for lightning to strike. It's more about uh, following a process, a learnable, systematic process.
And that's really the heart of the lean startup, isn't it?
Right.
How entrepreneurs today can use continuous innovation to build, well, radically successful businesses.
Absolutely. And Rees isn't just, throwing out another business theory here. His goal is pretty ambitious, actually. He wants to seriously improve the success rate for new products, innovative ventures all over the world.
By providing this practical sort of step-by-step method.
Exactly, a methodology.
And what really hit me was his definition of an entrepreneur. It's not just the person in the garage anymore.
No,
Uh,
not at all. He says a startup is basically a human institution designed to create new products and services under conditions of extreme uncertainty.
Which is a really broad definition. That means these ideas, these principles, they're not just for brand new tech companies.
Right. They apply in big corporations trying new things, government agencies wanting to improve services, even nonprofits trying to make a bigger impact. Entrepreneurs, in his view, are literally everywhere.
Yeah, if you're creating something new in an uncertain environment, you fit the bill.
Precisely. And think about it, there are tons of resources out there already, right? Business strategy, leadership books, market analysis.
Oh yeah, endless amounts.
But despite all that knowledge, most innovative ideas they still fail to really take off. That's the problem Ries is tackling.
So the lean startup kind of emerged from seeing the limits of those traditional approaches.
Yeah, it emphasizes speed-fast experiments and really understanding customers, but maybe not by directly asking them what they want all the time, more through observation.
And making decisions based on data, like a scientific approach.
Exactly, empirical evidence.
So for everyone listening, if you want to get a solid handle on navigating that uncertainty, building something new, without getting lost in theory, this deep dive is about pulling out those key insights from the lean startup.
We're really focusing on the core concepts that can shift how you think about building successful ventures.
Okay, let's jump into those foundational ideas then. The core principles of the lean startup method.
Right. The first one, as we sort of touched on, is that entrepreneurs are everywhere. It's really important to absorb that broad definition.
Yeah, it cuts across company size, industry, even for-profit versus nonprofit.
If you're creating something new under uncertainty, you're in that entrepreneurial mode.
And that leads right into the second principle. Entrepreneurship is management.
hmm Rees argues a startup isn't just the product, it's an institution. And because it's so unpredictable, it needs a totally different kind of management.
Management specifically designed for that volatility.
Exactly. He even suggests entrepreneur should be like a real job title in any company that relies on innovation.
Interesting, because traditional management, which is often about optimizing and executing known plans.
Right, that just doesn't work well when things are so ambiguous. This new style of management is all about learning and adapting quickly.
Which brings us to number 3, validated learning.
Yes. Rees is super clear here. Startups don't just exist to make stuff or make money, initially anyway. Their main job is to learn how to build a sustainable business.
Okay, learn how. And it has to be validated learning, right? That's the
Yep.
fourth principle.
Correct. It's not just learning in general. It needs to be scientific. You have to run frequent experiments to really test every piece of your business idea.
So moving past just gut feelings or assumptions.
Definitely. Getting concrete evidence that either backs up your ideas or, shows they're wrong.
It's about data-driven decisions, fundamentally.
Yes. And the engine for all this validated learning is the fifth principle. Build, measure, learn. This is the core loop.
Okay, break that down.
You take an idea, you quickly build a minimum version of it. The MVP we'll talk about, get it in front of users.
Then you measure their response carefully.
Right. And then you learn from that data.
Mm-hmm.
Do we pivot, change direction, or do we persevere on the current path?
And the key is making that loop really fast. Accelerate the feedback.
Absolutely. The faster you go through it, the faster you learn.
Okay, so this whole approach, it really pushes back against the idea of the traditional super detailed business plan. The one with 5-year
Oh,
projections.
definitely. Reedy's makes this great comparison between startup plans and planning a rocket launch.
How so?
Well, a rocket needs incredibly precise pre-planned instructions, right? A tiny error early on means disaster later. But many traditional business plans act like they have that same level of certainty. They map everything out. But it's often built on tons of untested assumptions about the market, the customer.
And if those assumptions are wrong?
Exactly. You can end up with what Ries calls achieved failure.
Achieved failure, that sounds bad.
It is. He gives this example of a company that planned for massive user growth. They executed perfectly, launched on time, built the infrastructure,
But the users didn't show up.
not in the numbers they needed. They succeeded at executing the plan, but the plan itself was based on a flawed idea of customer demand. So they achieved failure.
Wow. So if those big detailed plans are risky because they're built on shaky ground, what's the alternative?
Well, Rees talks about two kinds of activities within the bigger vision. There's optimization, which he calls tuning the engine, making small adjustments.
And then there's pivoting.
Right, which is a bigger changing of strategy. But both happen while still aiming for that overarching long-term vision.
So it's not like you just throw the vision out.
No, not at all. And it's not either. A startup is doing all these things at once. Running the day-to-day, tuning the details, and steering, deciding if and when to make that bigger pivot.
That sounds like a tough balancing act.
It is. Even for big, established companies trying to innovate, balancing optimization with the need for breakthrough innovation is a huge challenge.
This reminds me of that story he tells, the "where's the fire" moment.
Oh yeah, with Mark, the leader who felt like he had all the ingredients.
Right. Talented team, good vision, willing to take risks. But he felt like he had the kindling in the wood, but couldn't get the spark. He was missing the process.
That really highlights a gap, doesn't it? Traditional management often sets up the structure for innovation teams, but then treats the actual how of innovation like this mysterious black box.
Leaving the entrepreneurs inside without much guidance.
Exactly. They don't have the tools or methods to turn the vision into reality effectively.
So the lean startup is basically offering a toolkit, a set of practices, for people like Mark, anyone operating under uncertainty to up their chances of success.
Precisely. And to really see how it works, Rizis shares a lot from his own experience at IMVU.
Right, his company. What was their initial idea?
They started out trying to build an add-on for existing instant messaging programs. They put a ton of work into making it compatible, interoperable.
Okay, assuming that seamless integration would be the big draw.
That was the core assumption. But despite all the work, all the features they kept adding, customer adoption was, well, it was pretty slow, disappointing.
They were building stuff, but maybe not the right stuff.
That's exactly it. And then came the turning point. They got frustrated and decided to actually talk to potential customers directly, observe them.
And what happened?
It was completely eye-opening. They brought people in, watched them use the product, and found out their basic assumptions were just wrong.
Like what specifically?
Well, the whole add-on idea. The target users didn't really care that much. They were already using multiple IM clients anyway. Learning a new one wasn't a big deal.
Huh. So interoperability wasn't the killer feature they thought it was.
Not at all. And even bigger, the idea that people wanted avatars mainly to chat with existing friends. Also wrong.
Really? What did they want?
They actually wanted a separate network to meet new people, and the 3D avatars, they were perfect for that, for expressing yourself and connecting in that new virtual space.
Wow. So based on that direct feedback, that validated learning.
They had to make a big decision, they had to pivot, change their core strategy.
Which meant throwing out a lot of work, right? Especially that interoperability code.
Yeah, Riz mentions it was painful. He'd personally spent a lot of time on it, but the evidence from customers was just too strong to ignore.
So they shifted focus.
They did. Focused on being a standalone network, prioritized features for meeting new people, avatar customization, and suddenly their development got way more productive.
Not working harder, but working smarter.
Exactly, because their work was finally aligned with what customers actually wanted.
And the key thing was, they could see it in their metrics. It
Yeah.
wasn't just a feeling.
Right. The numbers started moving in the right direction. That proved to everyone, the team, investors themselves, that the learning was real, the new direction was working.
That's such a key point Ries makes. Startup productivity isn't about how many features you ship.
It's about how much validated learning you get for the effort you put in. He said IMVU ended up running hundreds of small experiments every single week to understand customer behavior.
Hundreds a week. That's
It
intense.
shows the commitment to that learning cycle.
Okay, let's switch gears slightly to something that sounds really counterintuitive. The audacity of zero.
Yes. The idea that it can actually be easier to get funding or support when you have absolutely zero traction, zero revenue, zero customers.
Easier than having small numbers. That sounds crazy. Why?
Because zero leaves room for imagination, right? People can project their biggest hopes onto it, a blank slate. But small numbers, like a tiny bit of revenue, they invite scrutiny.
Ah, okay. Small numbers make people ask, can this really scale? Is this actually going anywhere?
Exactly. Zero is pure potential, in a way. Small numbers bring doubt. Everyone loves the overnight success story, but slow, early traction can paradoxically scare people off.
And that creates a really bad incentive.
Totally. It encourages people to hide, to wait to get data until they think they can guarantee a big splash.
But delaying that feedback means more wasted work, potentially building something nobody wants.
Huge risk increase. IMVU went through this too. Early on, investors thought their modest projections were okay. But when revenue grew really slowly, some lost faith.
They wanted them to just stop and go back to stealth mode.
Yeah, there were serious suggestions to pull the plug temporarily. It was only because they kept experimenting and pivoting based on what they were learning that the metrics eventually turned around.
So validated learning and pivoting saved them from that audacity of zero trap.
In many ways, yes.
Okay, so we see how crucial learning and pivoting are. But what about when you have a really huge vision? How do you even start? Ries uses Zappos as a great example here, the think big, start small idea.
Right. Nick Swinmurn, the Zappos founder, had this massive vision, revolutionize buying shoes online. He could have tried to build everything at once, huge warehouses, complex logistics, massive inventory.
Like some of those early .com flameouts did, like Webvan or Pets.com.
Exactly. They tried to build the entire vision up front and failed spectacularly. Swinmurn did something much smarter, much leaner.
What was his first step?
He started with a super simple experiment, just to test the most fundamental question. Would people actually buy shoes online without trying them on?
Okay, how did he test that?
His first product was incredibly basic. He went to local shoe stores, got permission to take photos of their shoes, put the photos on a simple website.
And he only bought the shoes if someone ordered them online.
Yep, bought them at full retail price from the local store and shipped them out. That was it initially.
That is starting small. But it was designed purely in answer that one key question about demand.
Precisely. And it gave him quantitative data, did people buy or not, but also qualitative learning because he was interacting directly with early customers and the shoe stores.
And that tiny experiment was the seed for, well, for Zappos being bought by Amazon for over $1 billion.
It laid the absolute crucial foundation, validated that core assumption before scaling.
It's amazing how that core idea, start small, experiment, validate, applies everywhere. Ries gives other examples, right? Like that volunteer campaign at HP.
Yeah, Caroline's project. Her big plan had tons of untested assumptions about why people weren't volunteering and what would motivate them. It needed experiments.
And the Kodak Gallery event album feature.
Similar thing. They thought certain features were essential. They launched a basic version, and users immediately complained about missing features they hadn't prioritized while ignoring some they thought were crucial.
So the complaints were actually valuable feedback, validating the core idea but redirecting the feature focus.
Exactly. It showed people wanted the event albums, just maybe not exactly how Kodak first envisioned them.
Then there's the Village Laundry Service, VLS, in India. That's a great one.
Oh, yeah. Instead of building laundromats, they started with washing machines on a truck. Drove around, experimenting.
Testing locations, services, pricing, just by doing it and talking to people.
Right. And they learned the truck felt a bit weird to people, but a more stationary mobile kiosk worked better. They learned people would pay more for faster service, for ironing. They built the whole business model through tiny experiments.
And he even applies it to government, like the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, the CFPB.
Yeah, suggesting they treat the agency's creation itself as an experiment. Identify the core assumptions about consumer problems.
And test them early, like maybe start with just a simple hotline as an MVP.
Exactly. Get immediate feedback on what issues people are actually calling about before building out huge programs.
All these examples just hammer home that point from Steve Blank. The important answers aren't in your office.
No, they're outside the building. You have to talk to customers, observe the market, understand suppliers, Extensive customer contact is non-negotiable.
which led to things like lean user experience, lean UX, where even your customer profile is just a hypothesis to test.
Exactly. It's all about testing assumptions out in the real world.
Okay, this naturally leads us to the minimum viable product, the MVP. Define that for us again.
Ries defines the MVP as the absolute fastest way to get through that entire build, measure, learn loop using the least possible effort and resources.
Fastest way through the loop. So it's not necessarily the absolute smallest thing you can possibly build.
Not necessarily. It's the smallest thing you need to build to start the learning. It's a tool for testing your core hypotheses efficiently.
We've already heard some good examples. Groupon, starting with just PDFs and a blog.
Super basic MVP and Dropbox. Instead of building the whole sync engine first,
They made that simple demo video.
right, a video showing the concept with some insider jokes, Easter eggs,
Yeah.
for their target tech audience on Dig.
And it went viral, drove massive signups for the beta.
Totally validated the core idea even when VCs were skeptical. It proved people wanted that solution.
And food on the table, the Fatih example, that was the concierge MVP, right?
Yeah, where the founders literally did the service manually for early users, finding recipes, making shopping lists before building any software.
So they could learn exactly what people needed through direct service.
Deep understanding before automating. And then there's Aardvark, the question answering service.
They used humans behind the scenes, the Wizard of Oz test.
Exactly. They built super cheap prototypes quickly, and humans acted like the AI backend. It let them test if people would even use it, how they'd engage, before investing millions in complex AI. They learned enough to get acquired by Google.
Okay, but what about quality? Doesn't launching an MVP risk looking unprofessional or buggy?
That's a common worry, for sure. And Ries tackles it head on. He says the quality you need in an MVP is whatever quality enables validated learning.
So the goal isn't perfection, it's learning.
Right. If you launch an MVP that's so badly designed people can't even use it, well, that's learning too. It tells you design is critical for your users.
But you need to test if they value design the same way you do.
Exactly. Lean startup isn't against high-quality products. Quality should serve the goal of winning and keeping customers. You might need to lower some traditional standards temporarily to speed up learning.
But you don't want an MVP so buggy it actually hinders learning, right?
Definitely not. Defects that break the build, measure, learn loop are bad. If it's unreliable, you can't get clear signals from users.
Okay, so you launch the MVP, you start getting data. How do you actually measure progress when everything's so uncertain? Traditional metrics based on plans don't quite work.
Right. This is where innovation accounting comes in. It's Ries's term for a new way to evaluate progress, focusing on validated learning, not just hitting planned targets.
And it has 3 steps.
Yes. First, establish a baseline. Use your MVP to get real data on where you are right now. Conversion rates, signups, whatever matters. Confront the reality.
Okay, get the starting numbers, then what?
Step 2 is tune the engine. Run experiments, make changes, optimize things, specifically trying to move those baseline metrics towards your goal. It takes iteration.
And the third step is the big decision. Pivot or persevere.
Exactly. After you've tuned things, look at the data honestly. Are you making enough progress towards a sustainable business? If yes, persevere. If not,
It's time to consider a pivot, a significant change.
right. And Ries warns about the land of the living dead.
Uh-oh, what's that?
Startups that have just enough success to survive but aren't really growing or meeting expectations, they're zombies, basically.
And the myth of never give up can keep them stuck there, wasting resources.
Precisely. Perseverance is good, but not when it's blind perseverance on a flawed path.
So the MVP gives you that first real baseline data. And you should test the riskiest assumptions first.
Absolutely. If the core, riskiest parts of your idea don't hold up, there's no point testing the details.
Like I envy you using those cheap $5 a day Facebook ads.
Yeah, constant feedback, measuring the impact of tiny changes on real customer behavior, quick, cheap learning. He also talks about using the customer acquisition funnel idea for product development to see where people drop off in the process.
Now, you mentioned metrics. Ries makes a big deal about vanity metrics versus actionable metrics. What's the difference?
Vanity metrics are numbers that look good on the surface but don't really tell you anything useful or guide your actions, like total registered users or total page view.
They make you feel good, but don't help you improve.
Exactly. He uses Grokkit, the education platform, as an example. They had huge total user numbers, tons of questions answered, looked great. But it masked problems with engagement and retention, and it didn't help them decide what to build next.
So what makes a metric actionable?
It shows clear cause and effect. You do X, and metric Y changes in a predictable way. Split testing, or A/B testing, is key here.
Showing different versions to different users simultaneously.
Right. See which version performs better on a key metric. Grokkit used this to test lazy registration, letting users try before signing up.
Which is supposed to be a best practice, right?
Usually, yeah. But their split test showed that for their users, requiring registration upfront made absolutely no difference to signups or retention. All the effort on lazy registration was wasted.
Wow. Okay, so actionable metrics show cause and effect. Ries has the 3 A's for them.
Yep. Actionable, cause effect. Accessible, everyone understands them, not just data geeks. And auditable, the data is credible and trustworthy.
And he really likes cohort analysis.
Calls it the gold standard. Looking at groups of users who started around the same time and tracking their behavior over time really shows engagement trends.
And making this data accessible, like IMVU did.
Yeah. Letting everyone see experiment results. It builds a data-driven culture, helps settle arguments with facts, not opinions.
Okay, so all this data, all these metrics, they feed into that huge decision. Pivot or persevere.
Probably the hardest, most critical decision for a startup, and potentially the most wasteful if you get it wrong. A pivot isn't just tweaking things, it's a structured course correction to test a new fundamental hypothesis.
Like at 2Gov, which became Vodazin. They pivoted models.
Right. Started broad, engagement-focused, wasn't working sustainably. David Benetti pivoted to a paid model for really passionate political activists. Key metrics shot up.
It's about working smarter, not just harder.
Exactly. Having the courage to change when the data says your current path isn't working. He mentions path pivoting to limit connections. Wealthfront's big pivot from a game, ka-ching, to investment management.
Which led to real revenue growth.
Huge difference. Finding a viable business model.
And the signal to pivot often comes when tuning the engine stops producing results, diminishing returns.
That's a key indicator, yes. When optimizations aren't moving the needle much anymore, it might be time for a bigger change. He also mentions different types of pivots, like the zoom-in pivot.
Where one feature becomes the whole product.
Yeah, you realize that one small part of your original idea is actually the most valuable thing.
Okay, so once you find a promising direction, maybe after a pivot, you need to think about engines of growth. What does a Ries mean by that?
He means sustainable growth that comes from the actions of your past customers, not just one-off marketing blitzes. He identifies 3 main engines.
What's the first one?
The sticky engine. This is all about customer retention, keeping users engaged long-term.
Like a subscription service or maybe a marketplace where people keep coming back?
Exactly. Think collectibles or enterprise software with high switching costs. The key metric here is churn rate, how many customers you lose. Low churn is everything. Total user numbers don't tell the whole story.
Okay, sticky is about retention. What's the second engine?
The viral engine. This is growth through users spreading the word naturally as they use the product.
The classic example being Hotmail adding that signature line. Get your free email.
Perfect example. It creates a viral loop. The key metric is the viral coefficient. How many new users does each existing user bring in, on average? If it's greater than 1, you get exponential growth.
And viral products often don't charge directly to reduce friction.
Often, yes. They might monetize later or through other means.
All right, and the third engine?
The paid engine. This is straightforward. You pay to acquire customers, usually through advertising or sales.
And the math has to work, right?
Absolutely. The money you make from a customer over their lifetime, LTV, lifetime value, has to be greater than what you paid to acquire them, CPA, cost per acquisition.
LTV CPA.
Right. And that difference, that profit per customer, is what you reinvest to acquire more customers. It funds itself. It's not just ads, though, sales teams, retail, foot traffic costs. It all fits here.
And you shouldn't fund this with just investor money, right? It needs to come from revenue.
Ideally, yes, for it to be truly sustainable. He gives an example of a software company needing to pivot customers, hobbyists to enterprise, but their online paid acquisition wasn't working for the new target.
And Ries recommends focusing on just one engine at a time.
Generally, yes, especially early on. Trying to optimize all 3 at once is really complex and can dilute your efforts. Better to master one before maybe adding or switching later.
Makes sense. How does this relate to that term everyone uses, product market fit?
Well, Ries suggests product market fit is what happens when growth becomes, exhilarating, when demand is clearly pulling the product out of you. Think early Ford Model T, early Facebook.
But he also says a pivot doesn't automatically mean you failed to find it initially. and you might need to pivot after finding it.
Right. Markets change. He argues the engines of growth framework gives you a more rigorous, measurable way to assess product market fit.
How so?
Each engine has clear metrics. Is your viral coefficient taking off? Is your churn rate incredibly low and retention high? Is your LTV significantly higher than your CPA, allowing reinvestment? Those quantifiable signals tell you if you're truly hitting product market fit for that engine.
So tracking cohort retention can show progress towards a sticky engine fit, even if overall growth isn't huge yet.
Exactly. It gives you leading indicators.
Okay, so even with great metrics and processes, things go wrong. This brings us to adapting and the 5 whys.
Yes, a crucial technique for problem solving. The idea is that behind most technical problems, there's usually a human or process issue.
And you ask why repeatedly to get to the root cause.
Exactly. Usually about 5 times, give or take. Ries uses Taiichi Ono's classic manufacturing example, machine stops. Why? Fuse blew. Why? Overload. Why? Bearing seized. Why? Poor lubrication. Why? Pump ineffective. Why? No strainer. Metal scraps got in.
Ah, so you get way beyond just replacing the fuse to fixing the root cause, adding a strainer.
Precisely. It connects progress not just to execution, but to learning from failures. You should use it for any kind of failure. Tech bugs, missed targets, weird customer behavior.
It's an organizational tool, really. Helps you respond quickly without over-engineering.
Yes. Start with simple fixes at each why level. He even suggests having a dedicated 5 whys master to facilitate the process and keep it on track.
He mentioned IGN struggled initially, but then had success with a dedicated master.
Yeah, focusing it on a real, meaningful problem helped them get traction with the technique.
Another key adaptation principle, working in small batches. This sounds very lean manufacturing.
Totally inspired by it, especially Toyota. Traditional manufacturing loves large batches for efficiency, but lean startup, like Toyota, favors small batches.
Why? What are the benefits?
You find problems much faster. Think of Toyota's Enfluridon cord. Any worker can stop the whole line if they see a defect. Seems inefficient short-term, but saves massive rework later.
But product development often still uses large batches, right? Big design phases, big coding sprints.
Still very common. And it leads to slow feedback loops. Define features, design them, build them, test them. You only find out if the whole batch works way at the end.
Software has more potential for small batches than hardware, maybe.
Generally, yes. Much easier to modify code quickly. But Ries warns about the large batch death spiral delays lead to cramming more features into the next huge batch, making it even slower.
So the alternative is hypothesis pull. Only build what you need to test the next hypothesis.
Exactly. Pull work based on validated learning needs, not just pushing features. He gives the Alphabet Energy example, a clean tech startup.
They use standard silicon wafers.
Yeah, for small batch production. Allowed them to iterate fast and quickly pivot away from their initial power plant idea when tests showed it wasn't viable. Fast learning, minimal waste.
Tied closely to small batches is continuous deployment. Is that just for software?
It started there and is most common there, but the principle is broader. It means releasing updates very frequently, multiple times a day even.
Why do that? Isn't it risky?
The benefits are huge, reduces the risk of big bang releases failing catastrophically, accelerates learning incredibly, increases team speed, cuts waste. You overcome the fear of releasing unfinished work by testing in production with real users.
Get that feedback instantly.
Right. IMVU did daily releases. It fueled their learning engine. And the idea can apply beyond software rapid hardware prototypes, iterating on service delivery quickly.
All these practices, small batches, continuous deployment, validated learning, they feed into building an adaptive organization.
Yes, a company that can flex and respond to change. He tells the story of Intuit's QuickBooks team.
How did they become more adaptive?
Smaller teams focus on rapid iteration, more simultaneous experiments. But crucially, it wasn't just culture change. They invested in tools like a system to safely test new versions with real anonymized customer data.
So structural and tooling changes are needed too.
Absolutely. And the results were good, higher customer satisfaction, more sales.
Now, what about innovation in established companies? Big companies need to innovate too, not just startups.
Definitely. And Ries says they need to do it earlier in their life cycle than ever before to stay ahead. They need to manage a portfolio, optimize the core business, and develop new, potentially disruptive ventures.
How do they nurture those new ventures inside the big machine?
Requires a special structure, scarce but secure resources, independent authority for the innovation team, and a real personal stake in the outcome for those involved.
He talks about an innovation sandbox, or platform for experimentation. Like Snaptax at Intuit had an island of freedom.
Exactly. The key is protecting the parent company from the risks of the new venture blowing up while giving the venture room to maneuver and learn.
He tells that funny story about the big company meeting trying to decide pricing.
Yeah. No agreed upon data, different departments twisting numbers to fit their agendas, classic big company paralysis. You can't keep innovation locked in a black box and expect good results. It leads to the innovator's dilemma Christensen wrote about.
So what are the rules for a good sandbox?
Cross-functional teams, real problems, small batches, clear actionable metrics like 510, consistent metrics across teams, continuous monitoring, and the ability to kill failing experiments quickly.
It's about enabling rapid learning from failure within the larger structure.
Precisely. And if something works in the sandbox, you figure out how to scale it and integrate it.
Okay, near the end, he talks about the power of feedback and how adopting this feels.
Yeah, he notes that early on, advocating for new ideas means constant evangelizing. And people sometimes make suggestions more radical just to shift the eventual compromise.
And shifting to validated learning can feel weird at first, less productive.
It can, yeah. Because the problems of the old system are invisible, just background noise. The problems and friction of the new experimental system are right in your face.
But that's part of the learning process, using things like 5 whys to fix the new system's problems.
Exactly. And remembering lean startup is a framework to adapt, not a rigid blueprint.
Finally, the book ends with a powerful call to action. Waste, not the modern imperative.
Right. He contrasts today with Taylor's time in the early 20th century. Back then, the challenge was making things more efficiently. Today,
We can build almost anything. The challenge is knowing what to build.
exactly. He quotes Peter Drucker. There's surely nothing quite so useless as doing with great efficiency what should not be done at all.
And Ries sees so much waste in modern work, failed products, misguided projects.
Calls it a criminally negligent waste of human creativity and potential. Harsh, but he feels strongly about it. We need systematic practice, learning what creates value through real experiments, not just blind execution.
So wrapping this up, the core message of the lean startup really is that success isn't just luck. It's an engineered process.
Yeah, a process of learning, adapting, focusing relentlessly on validated learning through that build, measure, learn loop.
Using MVPs smartly, focusing on actionable metrics, not vanity ones.
Being willing to pivot based on evidence and building a sustainable engine of growth.
And it leaves us with a pretty profound thought, doesn't it? In a world where we can build almost anything.
The real challenge is the quality of our imagination, yes,
Mm.
but maybe even more, our ability to learn what actually should be built, continuously testing our ideas against reality.
So that the question for everyone listening is, looking at your own work, your own projects or organizations,
Yeah.
where could you apply these ideas? Where could you reduce waste, speed up learning, and build something truly valuable?